Hello, everybody, and welcome to Celebrating Cinema, a podcast for the love of cinema. Normally, you would hear Elliot here, but he's behind the boards, and it's me, Hugo, welcoming you all to a new episode. I'm joined, as always, mostly always by
Hello, Kiriko here.
A,
Hello, Tom here.
and today we also have a very special guest, Viktor van der Valk.
Hello.
We're gonna talk about you and why you are here in a bit, but of course, we always start with our cold open. I think it's a thing that we all have in common here, this insistent urge to plant yourself in the film theater and get engulfed by a tremendous film and seemingly levitate out of your seat into this sublime world of beauty and pathos. It's one of those inherent contradictions of cinema, how it forces you to be still, rendered immobile in your seat, and how it can still move you, push you, pull you, letting you transcend this mortal plane into an ever-existing world of shadow and light. Transcendence. Isn't it the highest goal of cinema itself? To transcend the tight borders of the film frame and to open you up to a world you couldn't imagine, envision, or experience yourself. If we consider the historical implications of the term transcendence, of a nature or a power which is wholly independent of our material universe, the effect of it in cinema is nothing short of metaphysical, spiritual even. Meaning it's a quality to a film that's near unobtainable. And I would go even further and say that filmmakers that set out to reach a transcendental experience with their films will more often fail than succeed, as the path to obtaining such a goal is something akin to reaching nirvana in Buddhism. There's no formula for transcendence, no secret recipe that gives you the sublime. And yet, there's Paul Schrader. Before the beloved screenwriter of undeniable classics like Taxi Driver and the prolific director of some of America's finest films like American Gigolo, Hardcore, The Comforters of Strangers, and more recently First Reformed, wrote and directed films, he himself was working as a film critic under the auspices of the ever-influential Susan Sontag. Totally immersed in an art form that he wasn't allowed to consume when he was a youngster, with a strict Orthodox Christian background, he attributed a spiritual quality to the world of cinema that many of his peers had missed. Bringing together the films of Carl Theodor Dreyer, Yasujiro Ozu, and Robert Bresson, he described in a book what he called Transcendental style in film, a form of cinema that managed to reach a more spiritual plane by employing austere camera work, acting devoid of self-consciousness, and editing that lacked editorial commentary. In short, these are directors who make films with a near dogmatic frame and find within it the means to transcend their own limitations. Films that use the narrowing lens of the camera to look deeper inside and open up the medium itself. The book manages to capture a quality to cinema that's seemingly ungraspable. Instead of taking notes and reverse engineering a recipe for a form of transcendental film, he managed to describe what inherent qualities these seemingly disparate filmmakers actually shared with each other. Something ephemeral, yet tangible. A reason to fall in love with the movies all over again, but each time maybe with a higher intensity. The irony of the films of Paul Schrader is that he only emulates or equals those qualities in his own films at very specific moments. And to paraphrase one of the best jokes in The Sopranos, the cinema of Paul Schrader is spiritual only in the way he combines the profound and the profane. And yet you can always feel this baggage, this awareness of the great classics of Dreyer, Ozu, and Bresson that influences Schrader's works. Who's maybe one of the most astute directors America has that's able to address our doom-pilled global consciousness with a form of high modernist art that many directors have lost base with. Think about it. What films are still able to transcend the limitations of their own medium and open up dimensions that go way beyond? In a time where we're thinking of immersion in a purely technological sense, either with IMAX cinematography or VR goggles, we're seemingly straying further away from the concept of film as an art itself, as an object that opens up new avenues beyond our current faculty of knowledge. But luckily, Schrader comes to the rescue again, because in the latest edition of his book, Transcendental Style in Film, He prefaces his original text with a new essay called Rethink in Transcendental Style, in which he argues that it's in fact the slow cinema movement, aligned with the likes of Andrei Tarkovsky and Béla Tarr, that have taken over some of the inherent qualities of transcendental style, in the way the slowing of time, movement, and the film image have opened up these otherwise closed avenues. Charting 3 paths from the artistic conception of cinema, Schrader composed a hilarious diagram in which he explores how film can set out from what he calls the narrative nucleus, you could also call it the narrative impetus, into a new artistic territory. There's the ever-observing type of film from the surveillance cam, the highly experimental territory of the art gallery, and the seemingly kaleidoscopic area of the mandala. And somewhere between the narrative nucleus and the outer territories of the surveillance cam, the art gallery, and the mandala is the Tarkovsky ring. Truly one of the best critical inventions of the last years. It's the demarcation line where films are still consumed in a theatrical context as opposed to a gallery, a niche film festival, or dedicated online streaming space. Seriously, Google, Schrader, and the Tarkovsky ring and marvel at what I think is a helpful and highly accurate piece of film criticism that haters could also see as astrology for film buffs. All of this is a really convoluted way to set up a lovely talk with one of our favorite directors from the Netherlands called Viktor van der Valk, director that is highly aware of the limitations of the frame as well, and the imperative of the narrative nucleus that has found some fascinating ways to try to bypass that in his incredible debut film Nocturne, which could be described as a happy marriage between Jean-Luc Godard and Leos Carax. He's nodding, so... A true cinephile as well, Viktor suggested that we talk about transcendental style in film and mainly focus on a film by Robert Bresson called Au Hasard Balthazar, which is a totally radical film in its own right, as it's a 1966 black and white film in which the lead character is a donkey who gets passed along from owner to owner in a rural village, experiencing the cruelty and maybe sometimes the mercy of human nature. We'll talk about that film, about Bresson, about transcendental style in film, and maybe also about Schrader in a bit. But first, Viktor, I'd like to ask you, where would you place yourself in the Schrader diagram?
Oh, good question. Well, I need to have a look on the diagram. I haven't read the book yet. So, let's see. Where would I place myself? Oh, I think... well, not even on the page yet. It all be very humble. How does this even work?
I can explain it a
please.
bit better and also try to make it a bit easier. So the idea is that, you have film as a delivery tool of a story, right? Which is maybe one of the most commercially applied forms of making film. Basically, it's what we see a lot in a multiplex or on TV. But you also, of course, have film as this artwork that operates in its own rights, that demands maybe its own kind of relationship of the viewer and the creator itself. So what our friend Schrader is describing is in the center you have the narrative nucleus, which, if you say like the need to have a story, if you stray further away from that, you come into more extreme territory. So if you go all the way to the art gallery, it's just pure formalism, it's art for its art's sake. It's totally formal, experimental.
Give us some examples on that nucleus, because maybe it would be nice to know what filmmakers are.
For instance,
involved
like in
here.
the art gallery, all the way at the end, you have somebody like Stan Brakhage, who's part of like this New York underground film movement of the 1960s. The Dutch,
That's how we do it here in Holland.
Yeah, he's like the guy who shot a 16 millimeter of his cat and then painted over the celluloid stock. Jonas Meekes and stuff like that.
Yeah, you have him in the Andy Warhol, Jonas Meekes world, that kind of stuff. All the way at the top, you have the surveillance cam, which is basically like slow cinema in its purest form, like a director that might observe a thing for hours and hours on end and might also make a film that's seemingly unending. All the way on the top, you have Wan Bin, who's the Chinese director who made all these, he made this really famous film about Chinese coal miners, and the film itself, it's like 15 hours or something, so just observational.
Take your time.
Yeah. And then you have the mandala, and all the way at the end of the mandala, you have people like James Bannon and Apichatpong Weerasethakul who make. It's also very observing, but there's usually a bit more of a conceptual thing behind it, and it's mostly meditation on something. So James Bannon, he would make a film called I don't know, what's the 24 skies? Yeah, which is just like 24 skies that you can look at. He just looks up like a shot of 10 minutes of a piece of sky and then a shot of 10 minutes of another piece of sky. So you meditate actually on what that is and what that means. All of these things, very far away, are outside of the Tarkovsky ring, and that's literally the place where it's still acceptable to see films in the cinema. Tarkovsky, for most people, is kind of like the outer realm, you know? It's like everything that's more extreme than Tarkovsky, you don't see it in the actual film theater, maybe in a very niche context, but it doesn't have a theatrical distributor. It's not really a commercial product. It goes in a gallery or an art film festival or whatever. And everything within the Tarkovsky ring, we have our, our friends like Terrence Malick, Michelangelo Antonioni, Mitsuguchi.
Bresson was in there as well, right?
Bresson is in there as well. You have Gus Van Sant, actually. He has the kind of like walk-in cinema. So it's films that you might actually see in an art house theater.
Where's Bresson located?
Quite in the center, I think, right? Because he uses story in a way, I think.
See where.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so Bresson is closer to the mandala than anything else, which kind of makes sense, I guess, because he meditates on things, on actions, on kind of like inaction as well. But he's still very near the center in a sense.
Just to make this a bit more inclusive, coming from Mr. Master White Guy, Paul Schrader, where's Chantal Akkerman on this nucleus?
She's close to the surveillance cam as well, somewhere in the
Observing,
middle.
right?
Yeah, in the middle of the narrative nucleus.
But
in
is
the
she out of
Tarkovsky
the
ring.
out?
She's
of
in the Tarkovsky ring.
in the ring.
She's in the Tarkovsky ring. Yeah.
Wow. It still feels like discussing the MCU, but then the most pretentious one.
It's
quite a task.
It's astrology for
If
cinephiles.
we were to regard as a cinephile astrology, where would you locate yourself? Victor first, but then the rest of the table.
Yeah, Victor needs to still
I
find his
think
place here.
I thank you for this very helpful information.
Condensation of the whole book.
Yeah,
literally.
this is normally not how I sit at home to think myself. Yeah, where am I in the ring of the Tarkovsky ring? Though these questions do pop up a lot. Like you do ask yourself, why am I making films?
Yeah.
And
what filmmakers do you align yourself with
exactly,
and for what reason?
exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought I was always very anti-story in a way, or I wanted to be, just for the sake of being fed up with the answer. Why do you want to make films to tell stories? I never found that a satisfying answer, so I always try to fight against it. But now I'm crawling much more, realizing, man, I really love a good story. And maybe I'm not in it to tell the story, but I do need a really nice story, and I really love it if it's beautiful. So I would definitely place myself in the ring, I think, because I think once you do not take the story that serious, or whether you're not interested in it at all, I think you place yourself maybe perhaps a little bit more out of the ring. But I'm not sure if I interpreted that correctly.
Well, yeah, that it's like it becomes more part of the art world, so it can be more about the work as the work rather than the work as a vehicle of the story. Yeah.
Then I would place myself, I think, towards where the people are here. I think Nuri Bilge Ceylan, I do not want to compare myself at all. It's very strange to put your name there because it's not, but like in the sense that
you're going towards the mandala.
I'm very much comparable to Antonioni, you know?
Right?
Like I'm pretty up there with Antonioni
I've done
today.
things, I find them pretty good. Like,
He's an alright director.
I can make the history books as well. No, so that's kind of like, I don't know, But does that answer you?
Towards the mandala.
Towards the
good.
mandala, I think.
Kiko, where do you want to be? Do you want to be closer to the art gallery, the surveillance cam, mandala?
Well, if we were to really take this as an astrology test, maybe as for now.
That's a good way of putting it.
As for now, I'm also thinking like me personally as a person, am I the one who draws myself more towards the observational? To what extent do I take my time to do things or to observe the world? I don't know. I would regard myself as a very slow person in many ways.
Let's not forget that in the first episode of this podcast, you said that you wanted to have your life directed by Anja Svarda. She's probably
wow.
not in any of the
She's
nucleus.
not here.
She's not here at all.
She's not here. Yeah.
Why is she not there?
She's too much fun. She's too much fun for Paul Schrader.
She loves a party. She loves a party.
Yeah, she doesn't make miserable enough films.
Yeah. I hope to say more towards Chantal Akerman then.
All right. How about you, Tom? I think you're like literally in the narrative.
Oh yeah, no,
nucleus.
yeah. No, wait. This is way more fun. You tell me where I am on the Tarkovsky ring.
Tom, I think you're between the like close to the narrative nucleus. You're in this little vision here, you know. This.
Oh wait,
like,
let me have a look.
You're like between the art gallery and the mandala, near the narrative nucleus. You know, you have your Jim Jarmusch, you have your Antonioni.
This really is like an astrology test.
Yeah, you have
like I'm around Lynch and Jarmusch,
Yes, you're right
Yeah.
there, honey.
but I'm also getting close to Bruno Dumont. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for that. uh,
Is that an insult?
okay. Yeah, I don't like me some
Huh?
Bruno Dumont,
Okay.
but where's the guy that influenced me the most when I was younger? Oh yeah, okay, so he's really close to the nucleus.
Who?
That would be Antonioni.
Yeah, you're close to the nucleus.
Okay.
Where would you put me then, Tom?
Oh boy, maybe a bit more towards Kelly Reichardt.
And so, like somebody that's
just-
reading your palm, and you're like, wait, no,
Yeah, no, that's not me.
I would respectfully disagree, but
Okay,
thank you.
Yeah, no, but I'm trying to sort of
Where would you
get,
put
get
yourself?
under your skin here.
I think I would put myself closer to the mandala, you know? You got your Tarkovsky there, you got your Sukhorov, you got your Apichatpom Verizateko. I think I would be edging the Tarkovsky ring. I'm sorry for totally derailing it and making it all about the Tarkovsky ring, but I think it is interesting because, of course, Schrader is like, you know, he thought about all of this very seriously. And like I said, he actually revisited everything that he wrote about transcendental style in film. And I was wondering, Victor, when we approached you to do this episode, like why you wanted to talk about this
Yeah.
specific part or like style of film.
Well, with Bresson, for me, he's a good example of a thing that we get taught here, that form always comes after content. Whereas for me, content is form. He starts with form in a way, and that creates all the meaning in his films, the way I experience that. So that's the thing I kind of realized when making films, and I learned from him that you can lean on your form, and that's maybe the most interesting part actually of the craftsmanship of making films, I think.
Can you maybe explain to the listeners who are not that aware of what Bresson does in his films? What is his style? What makes it transcendental?
Yeah, good question. Well, in a way, it depends. I think a lot of people can have a different view on his films, and each time you watch his film, new things open up. For him, like Godard also said, like, I don't want to tell a story, but I need a good story. His films are mostly based on books, either by Dostoevsky or by Tolstoy. He wrote maybe 2 films really from himself, like Le Diable, probablement, or even Au hasard Balthazar, which was kind of inspired by a line in the book of Dostoevsky's The Idiot. So the way he uses story in a film, where he leaves out lots of part, that could be a signature of a form that he uses to make his film. But also the way he uses sound, like in the opening of Au hasard Balthazar. I think the most filmic thing already happens in the title, in the beginning, when we hear the music being played and it cuts away for only the sound of the donkey there. You already know who's the main character without even having seen the character, right?
Yeah.
And this is what is typical Bresson, the way of leaving things out. And I would say to take the viewer seriously, to let the viewer be in touch with his imagination. And I think that's a very powerful and a very special tool we have as human beings.
I think that with the leaving out of things, he also manages to boil things down to their essential nature, maybe, because many of his films are so obsessed with the individual gestures of actions and just totally zoom into things that otherwise would be taken for granted if you would have it in a widescreen, but just a well-placed close-up. Like, I'm thinking of A Man Escaped, right? Like
Yeah.
a prison escape film of his, where, of course, every action is meaning because you're stuck in a literal prison and everything that you do could be a way to help you get out of there in some ways. And
Yeah.
I think he kind of set that formal language as well for many prison escape films and series that followed, that you need those kind of like meditations on the action itself to give it meaning, right?
Yeah, and to keep that lasting, like A Man Escaped is only about that escape. And why is it only about that escape? What is so special about it, right? And you start wondering because of the duration of either the shots or the whole film in its simple action of a guy wanting to escape the prison, and you start to try to invest in it as an audience. You want to know why am I watching this, right? And that's that's the thing that makes it interesting, I would say. And to come back on your question, why talk about Bresson? I think he might be very important for us, where I see the world being a bit in a spiritual crisis, I would say, in all kinds of formula aspects of the world. Like we thought we got rid of God and we weren't believing in anything, but now we come to realize that okay, maybe the economics or capitalism was kind of a religion, and we kind of feeling that this story doesn't make any sense anymore. And therefore, I think his films are very important. They talk about this, like the mystery instead of materialism. And even as a filmmaker, I would say that is very important for him to be watched, because I think also there's a big conflict there going on. I feel like if you talk about Bresson leaving away lots of things, for example, in characters, like the way people are acting, to come to the really essential meaning of a character's struggle or somebody's really real emotions. Nowadays, I would say we are leaning more towards the cute individual or the crazy individual or the special.
Or the people with like a huge backstory and a character Bible and all these eccentricities.
The eccentricity and uiterlijkheden.
Like these kind of physical quirks and stuff.
Exactly. Whereas I think sometimes they distract a lot.
Yeah. And it's like, I guess what you're saying, this is what brings, Schrader's writing about this on Enozu and Dreyer. And I think what you're saying brings all of these directors together in the mind of Schrader, at least, that even though they come from different eras of film history, Dreyer is definitely working foremost, although Ozu follows quite soon. They come from different parts of the world, different kind of like backgrounds, economical, religion-wise, and yet they all share this kind of doubt, or maybe this kind of like question, indeed, of belief in a world that is riled up by modernity. And they are directors who are really dealing with, well, what does it still mean to have these spiritual thoughts maybe in a world that's changing so rapidly?
Right? And aren't we a part of that? Or it's so rooted in us being humans, I think.
And that is exactly the thing, to maybe take it a bit more back to Ozar Balthazar. That's what I always find in Bresson's work is that, as you said, like he brings you so much into his films that the movie is also they're very much about you as well, because he's not giving you a lot, so you have to bring all your own baggage to the donkey, and put it on the donkey.
Oui, c'est Balthazar.
Balthazar. Mon mari, comme tout est resté pareil. Chouette un âne. C'est rapide. Moderne.
Cet âne est rétrograde et ridicule. Il nous rend ridicules.
Nous n'avons plus rien. Le peu qui nous reste, la maison, le jardin, n'est même pas à nous. Papa a distribué son dernier sou au créancier.
Voilà ce qui arrive quand on met la probité et l'honneur au-dessus de tout. Prêtez-le-nous.
Il a assez travaillé. Il est vieux et je n'ai plus que lui.
Rien qu'un jour.
Et puis c'est à ça.
Les promesses enfantines que nous nous étions faites, c'était dans un monde imaginaire, pas dans la réalité. La réalité, c'est autre chose.
Yeah, so Ozar Balthazar, I'm not sure if some of you have seen it for the first time for the podcast.
I saw it for the first time.
What did you think of it, Kyoko?
I would say in general, with a lot of the films that we've mentioned thus far, or I would say a lot of the films that are mentioned and the filmmakers that are mentioned in Paul Schrader's book, or would be defined as a transcendental style film, are films that you need to be in the mood for. So me personally, I'm quite selective for the moments that I decide to watch certain films, and I would say, funny enough, it requires a sense of energy that comes from a very different place. That I would say is it's complicated to talk about because you know that it's most probably going to bring you somewhere, but you also really need to give something to the film in order to have that experience, which I think is also a funny aspect to talk about when speaking about these films.
Totally, it's like almost everybody knows filmmakers that maybe, taunt you too much with that there can be meaning and value in action as well.
Yeah.
And that they want to play with, like Schrader also says now, also in the book, like play with your boredom even. The thing with Bresson is that I think that balance is more delicate or
For
less
sure.
explicit. Like he's not really, how do you say it, actively challenging you, but he is mapping out a film world where you really need to learn how to get into. And
Yeah.
I would say that like A Man Escaped is an easier
Yeah.
film because
Yeah.
To start with,
it's
definitely.
it's like
Or Pickpocket.
Pickpocket and A Man Escaped.
Pickpocket
are
is a
like
blockbuster
absolute-
compared to
Yeah, exactly.
the
Yeah,
other
Man
ones.
Yeah.
Escaped as well.
Yeah.
Like those are
Yeah.
kind of like really, even though they're small films in a sense, they map out this really big thing that you can easily align yourself to. And Ozar Balthazar is, of course, already in principle a challenging film because it questions the nature of man, of the nature of
Yeah.
animals. It questions
to
the
They're all really
impetus.
cruel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it questions the value of acting itself because if we can project our emotions on a donkey, I mean, now we have a film like Gunda, of course, right?
Mhm.
You can easily draw parallels there because Viktor Kosogowski is also just saying, no, these animals emote, they are sentient, so this is documentary and this is emotion, and you can identify with things that are happening in that film that just follows.
Well, I mean, this is just the process of personification, right? With animals, but
Also,
apparently
but
also
it's
with
also an
what's-
anti-personification film
Yeah.
because it's not, the Attenborough taking you by the hand, showing you how to feel about what these animals
No, he's
are
not making
doing.
a human out of him.
No, and I think Bresson is doing the same, but Bresson is doing something a bit more. Kosakowski is boiling down Bresson again because Bresson is showing the animal in relationship to the humans and is more making a point about the humans than the animal maybe itself at times.
Yeah.
But still, you
Yeah.
need to read all of the things maybe from the donkey and not that much from the of the humans themselves.
Yeah. Well, I was not there with the donkey. I was there with the girl because I think
Oh, yeah.
to a large extent it's also a film about horrible, aggressive men.
Yeah,
Or at
totally.
least
Yeah.
one in particular.
Yeah.
Gerard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was painfully hard to watch,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard.
Yeah,
It's
that,
hard,
that
yeah.
whole
Yeah.
fate to rape, which is there in the car,
In the car.
Yeah.
where she
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
back
yeah.
after they sort of circle around Balthazar, and then she falls, and then there are two instances where a car passes, and there's actually tension there. Like it's almost a thriller at that point. The car, please stop. So this will not happen. Of course, the car drives past because all the people in this movie are horrible. And then she goes back into the car, and then, well,
Yeah.
yeah.
But wasn't it also Godard who said that Marie, the main character, was a bit like the donkey?
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Whereas I was
sure.
wondering whether that was or whether I experienced it really like that, because to me also there's a beautiful scene where she crowns the donkey, right?
Yeah.
And the
It
guy
really hammers down the Christ
The Christ-
metaphor
But I mean,
there.
yeah, I mean the biblical
Balthazar,
elements
yeah.
are overly present there, right?
it's
and that's
it's actually literally Matthew 11, verse
Yeah.
28 to 30.
Oh,
Okay.
you've been on Wikipedia?
No, this is the only verse from the Bible that I know, which is "Come all onto me, because I will carry your guilt," or etc. Thanks, Hugo, for
He's going hard on the
completely
IMDb trivia.
fucking hitting me over the. No, this is actually. Oh my god! I have an original idea, and this guy throws me under the bus again. Oh man!
I'm just questioning you because I know where you are at the nuclear, the narrative nucleus, man.
I'm gonna shove that narrative nucleus up your Tarkovsky ring.
No, I was saying that in that scene, the boy is kind of creeping up on her, right?
Yeah.
And to me, she already hears the guy coming from the distance. It's not that she's not aware of him being present, I think. And Whereas the donkey for me is totally innocent and is totally not aware of his sins. In effect, maybe he doesn't even have one. Maybe that's why he's holy. Maybe that's why he's kind of like Jesus Christ in a way, I would say. Whereas Marie, she is human because she hears the guy coming. She's not going inside. No, what does she do? She sits on the bench and she puts her hand even out to him. And for me, Bresson always had said sometimes in an interview as well, like the hands, we do not control the hands. They control us. They do things we don't even want to do, or they do some things, some for the good, sometimes for the bad. But she is putting her hand there to be touched. So to me, she's not that, in that sense, only, how do you say it, like very innocent in a way. And she is very different for me than the donkey in a way. She is human and she has to deal with all the miseries a human being has to deal with. I mean, all the how do you say it, like the sins we possess.
He's like a canvas on which we can also project our human misery, and she is like immersed in it.
Yeah,
herself as
but
well.
the beauty of it, I think, because a lot of people always see a Bresson film and they say, Jesus, this is depressing, or they even accused him of being very pessimistic, whereas he had a beautiful answer and said, no, I think I'm being lucid. Next to the fact that there are tough elements, he doesn't avoid the struggle of life, and that life can be about suffering as well. There's always a huge presence of love in his films, I would say. And that might sound very Christian or very biblical in a way. I don't know. I think he was one. He was
a Christian.
Yeah. But I do find in his film that all of his films actually are about that.
They're very much about empathy.
Empathy, the presence of love, if you want to call it God, or you want to call it more mysterious way, or like Tolstoy, the God within yourself, love in yourself, it's always there. How depressing they are, maybe he said so himself that maybe it was lacking in Le Diable Probablement. That's why it carries the title of that, of course. But in all the films, even in L'Argent, at the end, the very end, where he didn't stop the film when he murdered the whole family. If it was only to say, look what money, how it fucks up a human... No, it ended where the guy gives himself in. That means the guy is still human. That means the guy is in...
He's repenting for his
Exactly.
sins.
And he knows what it is to be human. He knows what it is to love, in a way. Despite the horrors he did. But I think so that's very beautiful about the Bresson films.
Yeah, they're very much about redemption. That's the whole thing about... well, not Bresson spoilers, like those exist. When Balthasar dies at the end.
Yeah.
Because it's...
No, Balthasar dies at the end.
Yeah. Oh my God, Bresson spoilers.
Balthasar, he was dead all along, you know.
Oh no. Yeah. Yeah. At the end of L'Église, there's no relationship. Oh my God. I got my Antonioni spoiler through the podcast.
Oh my God. Don't do it.
Can we spoil some more films outside of the Tarkovsky ring?
Or inside of the Tarkovsky ring. Yeah. So the candle in Nostalgia, he gets it to the end, and then the guy dies. Yeah. Okay, so talking about nostalgia, actually, and maybe to steer away from this specific Bressonian example, we can maybe talk about some other filmmakers that are in the Tarkovsky ring, or Tarkovsky himself. Hugo, you're zoning out.
No,
like
I'm thinking.
Some of my friends did when we watched Stalker in the room here. I'll never forget that. I invited a friend of my ex-girlfriend to a screening, a sold-out screening of Stalker here, and I wasn't aware of how there are so many different ways of responding to his cinema. One of them is falling asleep immediately and just dozing off for 2.5 hours. This is what she did.
You know that Kiarostami said that it's not a problem if a film...
Yeah. Schrader says that as well.
Right?
Like if
It
that's...
can be
if
beautiful
that's-
to fall asleep.
Exactly. If that's the
Harmless.
emotion that his cinema brings to you, then
Exactly.
that's just fine.
Fine.
If you're
sweet.
crying,
we should normalize
if you're
it, not
crying,
weaponize it.
Kiriko, at the end of O Hazal Balthazar, it's also fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for that comforting thought.
But I remember seeing Stalker here, and so the friend of mine dozed off, and there was a moment
Stalker,
where
pretty entry level Tarkovsky. I would
it's
say.
that's his pickpocket blockbuster right there. But still, it's 2.5 hours of a couple of people going to a place where their dreams will come true,
Yeah.
or at least Tarkovsky spoilers.
Yeah.
That's what they're told.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to get there. And as we all know, or maybe not, Tarkovsky is the sculptor of time. At some point, you have the feeling that time
I
is...
am Tarkovsky.
I am Tarkovsky, the sculptor of time. Minutes, seconds, they're mine. I am Tarkovsky, the sculptor of time.
I hope he can hear you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, man. But anyway, I remember sitting there, and at some point, I had seen it many times, looked at my watch, and I literally had the feeling that I was there for 3 days. It could have been 3 days, could have been an hour, but it just felt to me like 3 days.
Yeah, well, I think what you're getting at is that you know, what Bresson really mapped out, also together with Dreyer and Ozu, is the idea that cinema can be about passing of time, and we already focused on the gestures, right? But to pay attention, I think it's mostly maybe giving that, like, it's mostly that, like, it's giving the attention, it is giving the time to things to be, to exist, to contemplate them, to reflect on them, so they get their inherent meaning, which is already in them. But like you say, Victor, about the hands, we are somehow too, like, dislocated almost, or we take those things a lot of times for granted. The way we act, the way we think of each other, the way we position ourselves to each other. And cinema, in their hands, is a tool to bring that attention back to that. I think it's really beautiful how you can see through Tarkovsky then how cinema has really become almost, well, maybe a mode of production, or you could call, if you're cynical, you could call it maybe a genre, but that there is a style of film now that's very prevalent, that is able to do that, that is able to reflect on many more other gestures as well, and maybe make them even more elongated. And Tarkovsky was great at doing that, but I think, you know, we're joking about that Tarkovsky rin, but there's directors outside of that that are doing really, really interesting things that just make you totally aware about how time is such an essential part of life right now. I guess it's one of the scarcest currencies that we have. And then just the act of a viewer to give that to this director, to trust this director to do something with your time. And then this director also challenges you in the sense that they will not give you the gratifying, pleasing stories that will just smooth you over from A to Z, but that they will make you also maybe a bit with the characters suffer for it, is interesting. And I would say very beautiful and inspiring, but it can be off-putting and it can put you to sleep and it makes a lot of people upset. Like I remember seeing A Tree of Life, which is in a way a totally different form of like transcendental style, but the only thing that he maybe shares with Bresson is this, Terrence Malick, is this kindness or this kind of like attentiveness to gestures. Also the hands, you know, he loves the hands. And I remember seeing that film for the first time in the cinemas and being totally blown away. And the credits are rolling and everybody, almost everybody in this cinema screening room is laughing, standing up like, oh, I'm so glad this piece of shit film is over.
Yeah.
And I'm like crying and I'm like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Why is not everybody like totally blown away? And
But that has to do also with how we look at film.
yeah,
And what it can all be. I think that history took a path when the bigger audience kind of forgot, or we have lost the fact that this is also part of our film culture, to take time and to look at it not as only a product. If you go and watch a film to be entertained and consumed, of course, if you're going to watch a Tarkovsky film or Bressonian film or a Terrence Malick, you'll be a bit like, whoa, yeah, fuck, this was long, man. I'm glad I'm going home, because you want something from it. Like Schrader said, you cannot meditate fast, right?
Yeah.
It's impossible.
yeah,
You need to take time for it. And film has always been connected to this as well. It has always been about time, capturing time, like Tarkovsky says. That's the beauty of film in a way. And that's the most essential thing, what you can do with a camera in a way. So it's strange that it's so not out there in a way. Yeah, that's a pity sometimes, I feel like, because not by judging the audience, but you take away an experience from yourself, which can be very refreshing or relieving. To have like Kiarostami said one time, like for him, film is is like if you're in a dusty room and you can just open the window just for a short while and then you close it again. That's film. Like, you know, you need to have that fresh air, right?
I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier when I was hesitant, or at least I had a sense of doubt yesterday when watching Bresson, is that it is also a form of confronting a very scary part of yourself, because it is maybe the only style of film that allows you to have a conversation with yourself, or at least give you space to have a conversation with yourself. And therefore, very evident and very obvious that people don't want to do that.
Of course, and but can you imagine how sick we must be then in
Of
that
course.
sense? No, but
Of
like,
course.
isn't this really important in life, that you have a proper conversation with yourself and your inner thing that goes on there?
Cinematic therapy.
Yeah,
I recently went to screening of West Side Story, right, the new Spielberg remake of the film, and it had been a while since I had been in the cinema again because of lockdowns, you know, and like cinemas are still kind of open here, but also only in very limited hours, so I didn't have the time yet to go. Suddenly, I'm in the cinema and I get a panic attack. I'm like, why am I getting a panic attack? But I'm just literally thinking, like, I am here for 2.5 hours, like, only with this and nothing else, no input from a phone or this. And it's just, it's a really easy observation to make, but it's literally also kind of, weirdly enough, muscle, you know?
yeah.
You need to be willing or able, or it needs to come easy to you to just give yourself over to a film, to also go further and then also experience the passing of time in it. As many films will just give you an experience where you don't feel the passing of time, right?
Yeah.
I think this is also very funny about much of contemporary blockbuster cinema, where you just don't really feel how scenes connect time-wise.
Yeah.
Like, do these people, like, very obvious one is like, do these people go to the bathroom? Do they eat? Do they shit, right? But also, what kind of time does it take from a superhero to go from one part of a city to the other, or even from one part of the galaxy to another? Like, how does it work? And this is, I think, emblematic of that, or it's just one way to show that these films just don't know how to deal with time.
Yeah.
Even though time, of course, in a genre context is so important, because you need, it's kind of like impending doom or deadline, or you know,
there is no time. The movies don't have time.
yeah, exactly,
Neither do
which is
we,
so
apparently.
strange, because there was
Yeah.
there was a time when we had, like, for instance, these great political thrillers and these kind of like heist films, or these kidnapping thrillers like Nick of Time, which literally kind of plays out in real time, right? Like, oh, your daughter is abducted and you have 80
This is the
minutes
Johnny Depp one.
Yeah. And you have 80 minutes to free her this, and then suddenly you're like, oh fuck, 80 minutes, like 24 or something, you know, right?
Yeah.
So there's like mainstream productions that are very well at dealing with that, and then you have things where it's just totally a flat circle, like time is just whatever the screenwriters can think of. Yeah, time is a flat circle, man. Really makes you think.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting what we were talking about, you know, how these kind of films make you so incredibly aware of that passing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, to come back on what you were saying, like, maybe these people who create those kind of films, they think they are making it for an audience and they want to grab their attention, right? And by doing that, they think they need to give them more because that's what the audience love. But I think an audience never really knows what he wants, in a way.
Yeah.
And
I
especially
believe this as well, yeah.
Bresson is good at doing exactly the opposite, and Tarkovsky as well, but all these filmmakers, probably they share that in common, to take away a lot of things. And also that can enhance an attention, I think.
Yeah.
If you keep something more mysterious, if you do not show everything, which is your task as a filmmaker, it's more interesting to, or at least that's how I work. I'm getting curious about something because I want to know. You were telling me a little bit about the Tarkovsky ring, and I want to know, what is this? Give me the book, you know?
Yeah.
I cannot. I'm not following it. Give it to me. I need to know.
Yeah, apparently, like, especially American cinema thinks that the audience is incredibly dumb. It's also just not a compliment for somebody who looks at your films, because you apparently think that people don't have time, don't need to think about anything. There doesn't need to be any fat on the bone here. You just need to fucking swallow it down with your popcorn and go
Exactly.
by.
And then the worst thing is that they turn it around. That if you were to say something like, "I would love to be a Brazilian film or Tasco," if I have the chance ever to be there in their spotlights, they would say, "But no, but you need to think about your audience."
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And then it becomes a problematic to me. I mean, that's weird that it has turned like that. That
Then you look at directors like Christopher Nolan, with Interstellar, you can think a lot of things about that film, but that moment where they are on that planet and you have this very tangible feeling of what time will do to them, because every minute on that planet is like 7 years on Earth or whatever. You're suddenly like, everybody's super aware, like, what the fuck? This is like really exciting, I always say that Christopher Nolan kind of like is a master of complications watchmaker. He just really likes to make Swiss watches.
always a ticking thing.
Always the ticking thing. He just really likes that idea of playing with tension and time.
Hey, sorry, I really need to say something here, because that's really funny that you bring up exactly that point. Because the fat that's not on the bone of Interstellar is that when they come back from that planet, where they've been for years, even though it took minutes,
Yeah.
the black guy is still on the ship and he turned gray. And the entire story that I wanted to see in Interstellar is there, because they walk into the ship and he says like, "Oh man, I've been here for like 20 years." And they were like, "Oh, we were down for 7 minutes." And Matthew McConaughey just walks past him like that. And I was like, "But what? The entire story of the film should have been there." I wanted to see like that guy being on his own for 20 years on that ship,
Would've been
growing
amazing.
old, thinking about his kids who have probably died, and Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway down on the big wave planet.
But that's like true. Like, that's a very valid point about how inconsistent these films are. Whereas, a director like Bresson, you could never accuse him of being inconsistent.
No,
I'm also
no, he's very consistent.
He's very
Yeah.
into perfection.
yeah. What do you think of Schrader himself? Because he is like this missing link, or he is like inevitably now connected to these films because he wrote this book before he was a filmmaker, right? And then he took a lot of the sources of inspiration and put it in his films, but also in a way that it's not very apparent. And also he doesn't let himself be limited to this love for these films. It's not like there are change on him. Like it's not baggage or ballast.
I saw an interview with him where he was talking about the revisiting Transcendental style, where he just had a very simple answer that, like, although he grew up with these films of Bresson and Ozu, and he really loved them and liked them, he said he wasn't just interested in making one. He never was interested in making one. Well, if you're not interested, and he had more attention maybe towards the more common film, or with who contains more action and emphasis on the characteristics of characters, and if that's what you love, go for it. But he cannot flee from what he also likes, and then you get a certain mixture, right? Whether they belong to one realm or another realm, or he creates his own kind of very specific kind of film, and that's a beautiful thing. I would say that's very authentic in its way. I think with First Reformed, you could really see he was very much inspired. He tried to go a little bit back. I thought he tried to make a more transcendental film.
Yeah.
That film
Right?
pretty much is Diary of a Country Priest by Bresson.
Exactly, a modern version of Diary of a Country
Yeah.
Priest.
I remember seeing that for the first time and reading about it, that the main rule of filmmaking, one of the main rules of filmmaking is that you don't have somebody writing down something, reading that at the same time in voiceover, but then also showing you that exact action on screen. And that is what he's doing as in the new film, the card counter as well. He's constantly doing that. So you have a voiceover and you see somebody writing that exact sentence, but you also see him doing it. Like, it's this weird sort of...
I love this because it becomes also, if you take it back to what he writes about in vis-a-vis Bresson and stuff, it is putting the attention to that, right? It's literally, you can't escape the fact that there's a guy in a room writing the thing, thinking about the film. The guy in the room is meditating on it, so you better meditate on it as well. Right?
You're part
so
of
it's
it.
like you have no other choice but then to be there
Yeah.
at that moment and join that. And then you can think a lot about that, but I think that's really nice.
Yeah.
It also brings together all of his like Taxi Driver, which was his debut script, which is also just a guy in a room writing things,
Yeah.
radicalizing
Yeah.
himself,
He's got something
basically.
with that writing thing.
And
going
then you
on.
have Light Sleeper where it happens, and then you have First Reformed, and then in the card counter it's Oscar Isaac, who's have you seen the film already?
No, I haven't.
It's Oscar Isaac, who's like he's been in jail for a long time, and he learned how to card counts there, and he's a really good
Count
gambler.
cards. Count cards.
He learned how to card count.
Yeah. Count cards.
I know.
Yeah, okay,
No.
sorry. Yeah.
He learned how to count cards there, and he becomes kind of like a professional gambler. But he also every night at like in his motel room, he's reflecting and like really
With sheets over all the furniture, which makes it very mysterious.
Yeah, so I interviewed Paul Schrader in Armenia, and he said that like the Oscar Isaac character in the film, every time he comes in a new motel room, he takes these like big bed sheets, and every piece of furniture in the room, he packs in this like
It looks like a
sheet.
Christo art installation.
it looks
constantly. Yeah.
It looks really weird and not sterile, but kind of like uncanny. And he said that he knew a guy that did that in the 70s. And so he would come in his hotel room, and it would just be totally like everything would be packed into bed sheets. And
Wow.
he just always remembered that and was like, gotta put that in a film sometimes.
The whole transcendental style in that film being very austere, even that character makes his own life extremely austere by doing that.
Exactly.
Anonymizing
It's like,
the surroundings.
it's a form of stoicism, and it's
Yeah.
very funny that one question that I asked him is because in the card counter, is Oscar Isaac when he's in jail, he reads Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, which kind of brings you back to transcendental style in film, to meditate on something, right? So I ask Schrader. I also read Meditations after that because I'm like, shit, I'm gonna interview Schrader. I'm gonna ask all of these very smart questions about Marcus
Top
Aurelius.
of your game.
Got like totally Marcus Aurelius built. It's great. It's really good. Also, the cool thing about Marcus Aurelius is that he was not a really smart guy, as in he was not a big philosopher. He was just like an Roman emperor.
Oh, just like a Roman emperor.
But
he was
but
just a Roman
wrote,
emperor.
But he wrote.
Yeah.
He meditated on his position in life, and he didn't do it in this really brainy language, or at least for that time, it was not really sophisticated. Now it might seem so. He was just really stoically also reflecting on his own life. So that's interesting. So I was thinking, oh, that stoicism that's in that book, it's kind of like really Schrader's whole thing, right? It's like perfect. And then to bring that back to transcendental style. So he said was that he was writing the screenplay about a guy who was in a military jail because he was arrested for war crimes. And he asked people on Facebook, like, do I know anybody who has been in such a jail? And somebody reached out to him and was like, yeah, I've been in one of those jails. What do you want to know? And he's like, yeah, well, everything. And so he asked him a lot of questions and interviewed him and stuff. And apparently, Marcus Aurelius is the most read book in the library in that jail.
Wow.
So that's the reason that it's in the film. And then I'm like, but wait, that's just like uncanny because it's too perfect for your filmography. And he's like, well, sometimes a book is just a book. I'm like, damn it, man, come on. It's more than that, though, right? It's like,
wow.
it's too perfect.
Wow.
Yeah, a thing that is very interesting about this film by Schrader and many others is that he so explicitly references the song. You have the famous pickpocket ending, right, of the two fingers like going to touch each other, and that's now kind of like a returning motif in the films of Paul Schrader. And
Oh, really?
in the card counter, it's beautiful because it ends back in jail again, which seems like a big spoiler, but it's not. And you have like the same gesture, like it's two fingers, like the Michelangelo, God touch.
Yeah.
It ends with like Oscar Isaac behind bars, like behind the plexiglass and of the visitation room,
Mhm.
and then Tiffany Haddish, who's kind of like they're kind of in this
Ah.
interesting relationship with each other, and then there's the glass between them, the plexiglass, and her nails are like really, really long and well done. So she comes like literally like her fingers crawling up to that glass, but then she needs to like almost bend it 45 degrees to be able to put
Stunning.
like the top of her finger on it, because otherwise it will break her nail. And it's like probably what I was saying about the profound and the propane, you know, that's also Schrader, like taking something almost holy as Bresson, and then also just making it very everyday, almost banal, but still very beautiful, and still have the pathos in it, you know. I think that's the sign of a great filmmaker.
You found the essence.
Oh,
Great.
that sounds like that sounds like he's dead.
That was maybe
It's
a
all
fitting finale for the episode. Victor, thank you so much
No,
for
thanks for
sharing
inviting
so
me.
much about not only, you know, where you are on the Tarkovsky ring, but also talking so in depth
Yeah.
about Bresson. And also it's interesting how you can position yourself vis-a-vis such a great director, which must be quite daunting sometimes. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
And thank you to everybody who's been listening. This is probably the last episode that we'll have in this beautiful year called 2021. We'll be back next year for sure with more thematic conversations and great observations. And have a wonderful new year.
Yay!
Yay.